Hi everyone, I'm Howard, and this is Otto's Retirement Corner. So let's further our discussion about bonds. I did a quick video last week about what a bond is, and virtually nobody watched it, but that's okay. Some people wanted that information. And now we're going to move on to, in essence, part two of why I believe people should have bonds in their investment portfolio. Now, let's make one thing clear. That decision changes over your lifetime. And there's that popular, here's your formula for how many bonds, how much you should have in your bond allocation. Take your age minus from 100. So if you're 50 and it leaves 50, you should have 50% bonds, 50% stocks. They changed that to 120, so you take your age from that, leaving 70, so you should have 70% stocks, 30% bonds. That's, in my mind, that's kind of baloney. Ignore that. But I want to make my case for bonds, and it may not be a strong enough case for you, but that's fine. So, when you're young, when you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, and you have 50, 40, 30 years ahead of you, more in some cases. In my mind, a 100% stock portfolio makes sense. I've heard 90-10, but like what's the point of the 10? And over time, throughout history, stocks in the long term outperform bonds. No question about it, no matter what kind of bonds you're talking about, whether it's treasuries or corporates or munis, stocks outperform bonds. So, most people then say, well, then what's the point of having bonds? Why hurt your return? And for the most part, I agree with that up to a point. And the point is when you retire, and maybe even a little bit before you retire, maybe 2, 4, 5 years before you retire, 100% stock portfolio isn't the worst thing in the world. Keeping in mind your longevity, when you plan to retire, what your family history is, things like that. Time is on your side when you're invested heavily in stocks as opposed to bonds. Now, here's what I want to talk about. The fact that when you retire, the difference in your portfolio is instead of contributing to it, you are now withdrawing from it. So, we've talked about why that's different in the past, and you want to look at sequence of return risk. And for those of you who don't know what sequence of return risk is, in the first 2, 3 years of your retirement, when you're withdrawing money, very poor stock market returns and or high inflation can blow up your portfolio. You're taking money out when stocks are down, so you have less money to grow over time. Whereas if the market does well, you could be taking money out of your stock portfolio and still have more money left at the end of each year, depending upon how much you take out, if you're doing that reasonably. So that's what blows this up when you talk about a 100% stock portfolio, when you're withdrawing money. So what I first want to do, and I'm going to talk in very general terms, we can get so specific this would take hours. I'm going to talk about the S&P 500 or US large cap stocks. And when I talk about bonds, I'm going to talk about intermediate treasury bonds. And the reason I'm doing this is because in the studies we've seen in the past where they've looked for the best or the most efficient or the most promising withdrawal rate, that's the portfolio they use. Usually look at 50% stocks and 50% bonds, and they say, in the most famous, the Bengen study, take 4% out and you're good for 30 years. Adjusted for inflation every year, that 4%, grows, but you should be okay with a very high 100% probability of success. It's changed when they said, okay, add small cap stocks to some percentage. If you're looking at a shorter lifespan, or if you don't want to plan for 30 years, say you're going to retire at 70, you have a poor family history of health, and you think you might last 15 years, the formula changes. So the first thing I want to look at is the return on stocks. All right. So I've covered the S&P 500 here, and again, that's all we're going to look at today. It could change wildly depending upon whatever indexes you want to use. But I went back for 30 years, and I did 5-year increments, and then I added some. You'll see where the months are added. These are just some some, I want to say like flex points where it hit high, the market hit highs or lows. And just to sort of show you what could happen over time. We look back 30 years and it's grown from, more than 500% from 1,000 to 59.55. So you say, hey, what's wrong with that? Well, here's the problem. There's times where if you had retired, let's say in 2000, when the market was 25.57, you take it out to 2015, 15 years later, it returned 11.3% in total. And a compounded, that's 15 years, that's less than 1% a year. It's probably about, I don't know, 0.5, 0.6% per year. It did extremely poorly. And, I've got a graph here somewhere. Okay, sorry. Here it is. This is the graph. And I had a sort of hand right over it because it didn't show up really well. So, this is 1995 and that's 2025. And you can see, there's been some really down periods. And sometimes it's taken a long time to get back to where the market was when it started that downward trend. And that's what I'm talking about. From 2000 to 2015, you virtually had no return in stocks. And had you retired at that time, you would run a much higher risk of running out of money during retirement, especially, if you're wanting that to last 30 or 40 years. It's an uphill battle. There's another period here from 1995 to 2009, a 14-year period, where it only returned 7.2%. There's times where the market can do very poorly for much longer time than you could last financially. So, what it turns out is, when you look at that chart, you can smooth these bumps out, kind of go like that, by adding bonds, because bonds don't move as much as stocks do typically. Some people say they're counter to stocks, but that's not necessarily true. In some periods, they run with stocks. As stocks go up or down, bonds go up or down. And when stocks go up, sometimes bonds go down. And when stocks are down, sometimes bonds go up. So you don't know, but over time, it's not as bumpy. So it gives you some safety, in other words. So now I'm going to look at, and I ran this on Portfolio Analyzer. These are success rates for different allocations. So we had stocks and bonds, and I used, again, intermediate treasuries. If you use corporate bonds, and you could, there's several categories within the software where you can say, this is what my portfolio looks like. It doesn't have to be large cap U.S. stocks. You can make a mix, a large cap, small cap. But this is what I just did, just because this is kind of what the Bangin study used, and other studies have also used. So with 100% stocks, and again, I'm using a 5% annual withdrawal rate, and I'm using a 25-year withdrawal period. And the reason I do that is people seem to object to the 4% withdrawal rate and the 30-year withdrawal period. So I'm going to, take the withdrawal rate up a little and, take the period down. As you play with those, these success rates change, obviously, and you can go in and play with those yourself. So 100% stocks under normal returns, and it's a Monte Carlo analysis. It takes the history of what's happened in stocks and bonds and inflation, and it just jumbles it up and it runs 10,000 different scenarios, and it gives you a success rate. So with 100% stocks, you have an 84% chance of not outliving your money, that you'll still have money when you die, and that's a pretty good success rate, okay? So understand, 5%, 25 years, 100% stocks, you still have a pretty good chance, all right? Depending upon when you retire, though, all right? This is just an average. There's some very down, low years where you run out of money, and there's some, some of those portfolios end up with, start at $1 million and end at $6 million. But you want to be sure you're going to survive. So now if we go 80-20, you'll notice we dropped stocks by 20%, added bonds by 27%. Our success rate went up. So now we're at 87. That's a really great rate. We go to 60-40, now it's 88%. So you can see somewhere in here at 50-50, it's 87, 40-60, 88, so it doesn't much change here. So, from a 60-40 to a 40-60 is probably your best bet of being successful and not outliving your savings. Bonds have smoothed out your returns, and they provide income and they provide safety. So What I did here then is you can tell the software, hey, I want to make the first year of my retirement the worst market results and the worst inflation. You can do, the first 2 years are worse, or first 3 years, or whatever you want. So you can see how much it changes. So if you happen to retire in the worst year, now you've only got a 71% chance with 100% stocks. Now we go down here, 60, 40, 50, 50. Now you're back up to 80%. If we change this to 2 years, the first 2 years are worse, these numbers jump way down, and these categories, 60, 40, 50, 50, are even better compared to the other results. Now, if we did this with corporate bonds, the success rates actually turn out to be a little higher because corporate bonds tend to return more in a general sense than treasury bonds because they're not as highly rated. And we can talk later about, what kind of bonds you buy, how do you buy them, mutual funds versus individual. I talked about that a little bit last week. But the whole point here is, and I think what this shows is, there's more safety and a better chance of success when you add bonds to your portfolio. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me if this changes your mind any, or tell me if it just reinforces what you were doing. Give me your opinion. Give me your questions. If you want me to talk more about bonds, certainly happy to do so. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.